Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi everybody, my name is Beverly Burnett, and I'm a very grateful recovering member of the Al-Anon family group. And I am so grateful to be here. When Pam called and said, would you like to come to San Diego? I was like holding my fingers crossed until I got to my calendar to make sure that my weekend was available. And this has just been wonderful. I flew in yesterday. I'm grateful for Pam. She met me at the airport. She left her cell phone at home, which was going to be our means of communication. I called her at the office. I followed directions. I called her at the office and I says, I have just landed. And she says, I'm on my way. So I got down the escalator, got outside, and I called her. She says, call me and let me know where you're standing. And I says, okay. So I call the office and her husband answers the phone. And I says, oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was Pam's cell phone. And he said, it is. She left it on her desk. But, you know, as it turned out, I had my wardrobe planned before I got on the airplane. On Thursday night, it was all lined up. So I told her I'd be wearing a green jacket, black jeans, and I pull a purple suitcase. So even though she left her cell phone on the desk, she just drove up like we'd known each other forever. And, you know, we have, it feels like, known each other forever, because the common bond is that we love an alcoholic. And we keep coming back. And the longer we come back, the more enthusiasm that we have for the program. So I am grateful. I'm grateful for Doug and the message of recovery that makes us laugh. And he is so spectacular about describing just what it takes to stay. And it is. The key is willingness. And while we're laughing, we're understanding that he has given us the gift of sobriety. And I have appreciated Doug for a long time. And I've known Carla for a long time, and I enjoyed Joan's talk last night, and just the fellowship and the breakfast and the meals that we've been provided, and that gargantuan basket of stuff. It was amazing. So a beautiful room overlooking the swimming pool, and it was shared by people and mallard ducks, and I just thought that was pretty incredible too. So I can't believe they put a mall right across the street. I'm a walker, so I have been like over there. I've got Band-Aids. I've been to every restaurant. I want you to know, if you need a Band-Aid, go to a restaurant. They always have them. So my feet are, I've got Band-Aids all over because didn't bring walking shoes, and been all over the place taking pictures of the flowers. And I mean, it's just, this is just a beautiful place, just a beautiful place, a beautiful weekend. And a beautiful way to celebrate our recovery, and especially over the Easter weekend. You know, it's a rebirth for a lot of us. It's just a celebration, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I like to tell you about me. I am almost 69 years old. I've been in Al-Anon. I just celebrated in February my 29th Al-Anon birthday. I did not intend to stay. 28 days was my limit, and now I've been here 29 years. And I was very young when I got here, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. I've been married to the same man for almost 49 years. My son celebrated 29 years of continuous sobriety on March 30th. And it's just been a journey that I called him up on the 29th, and I says, happy birthday, honey. And he says, my birthday's tomorrow. But he said, thank you for remembering. And I'm like, how could I forget? How can I forget? My husband celebrated his 29th year on February 23rd. So we were a family that got sick together, and we are a family that is still trying to get well together. And I have a lot of passion for the program. My home group is the Friendship Al-Anon Family Group. We meet about a block off of I-35. Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Saturday at noon. We have a couple of open AA meetings that I absolutely love to attend. And I'm hooked into the group. I'm hooked in with the people, and I'm a part of, and I like it a lot. I had a different home group for 18 years, and it was really hard by choice. I changed groups. When I was 18 years in the program, I had to make it a little easier on myself, and the group I'd been going to for all those years was in Dallas. So I don't have a whole lot of patience for people who say, oh, well, the meeting is too far away. I drove 22 miles 8 to 11 times a week. For the first 8 years, I was in the program. And so, I wanted what you had right from the very beginning, and I know that I was willing to go to any length, even though I didn't know I was willing. I had no idea what I was chasing. I had no idea what was going to happen to me, but it's been an incredible journey, and I'm really grateful to be a part of it. I have 3 granddaughters. I have 2 sons. One is deceased. I have 2 golden retriever dogs. They're both registered therapy dogs, and we do a little work in the community, and it's a lot of fun. We all 3 of us are show-offs, and it's fun to do that. So my life is just something that I could have never dreamed. When we get into recovery, some people we've heard say, draw a line down or get out a piece of paper when you're new and kind of put down what you would like to have happen to you, or what are your dreams and what are your hopes. And I can tell you that what my piece of paper would have looked like when I wrote that maybe in the first year of my time in Al-Anon, it would have been materialistic. It would have been, bigger, better, more. I can tell you that now. But what I realize is that when I write that piece of paper today, it's simple gifts of gratitude for the people in my life and the grandchildren and the dogs and the opportunities that I have and the length of marriage with my husband. And, we've had our trials and just a whole lot of things that I would have never, ever dreamed were possible for me, or even that I wanted, or things that I didn't even know I was lacking in my life. I was raised in alcoholism. I was born in Chicago. My father, I believe, was an alcoholic, and we're not supposed to call anybody an alcoholic unless we know for sure that they've gotten up to a podium of Alcoholics Anonymous and said, I'm an alcoholic. But I have a little story about my dad. About 18 months to 2 years before he passed away, he was dying of multiple myeloma, and he didn't want to let us know how bad he was. And finally, one of the neighbors called me on the phone, and she said, your dad is laying here, and he's really sick, and he needs you girls. And I said, we call him every day, and he always says he's just fine, thanks. And she said he's not fine. And so I followed what Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous had taught us, and it's to do the next right thing. And within 24 hours, I had my dad moved from Santa Barbara, California, to my house. And then I went to work the next day, and I said, I need a hematology oncologist. And my teller friend next to me says, I can fix you up with that. She made 2 phone calls, and next thing I knew, I had an appointment with just the right doctor. He was a specialist in that field, and we were proceeded on and come home one day after a treatment of chemotherapy or radiation, I'm not sure which, got him settled in his chair, covered him up with a blanket. He was always cold. And I handed him a magazine, and on the front of that magazine was a drink, one of those kind. I've never been to the Caribbean, but it was kind of the kind that they advertise the Caribbean with the cherries and the fruit and the umbrella. And I looked at that, and it was a hot day in September, and it stays 100 all the way through the end of October where I live. And so I said to him, oh my God, Daddy, doesn't that look good? And he goes, Pigeon, ever since I've been on this morphine, I really haven't wanted to drink. And you know what? I felt like after that I could probably pretty safely call my dad an alcoholic, because he was a fun drunk. He was involved in a lot of stuff, and what I know is that my mother reacted to him. And that was my teacher. You know, I watched her get angry at his drinking, react to his drinking, not talk to him because he drank, chase him down bars, make public scenes, take her rage at my dad out on me, and I don't understand why it's like that. And, and I'm trying to do, like, make sure I'm home at 5 to 5, get the table set, make sure I've got my work done. But it was no matter what I did, it didn't make any difference, because she was affected by alcoholism. And on any given day, she could be happy, and on any given day, she could be just full of resentments and rage and frustration. A lot of the things that they talk about in our pamphlet, Understanding Ourselves, the fears and everything that go with that. So no matter what I did, and I didn't know that back then, no matter what I did, it wasn't ever going to be enough to overcome the effects of alcoholism. And sometimes she would treat me very lovingly, and other times she would grab the cat of nine tails and just beat the snot out of me. And I never knew which day was which. So you learn to walk on those eggshells. It's like that little frog story. If you put the frog in the water and you turn the heat up really slow, I was the frog. They turned the heat of alcoholism up on my life really slow. And I didn't know I was boiling to death in the disease of alcoholism, and I was a kid. I was born into it and raised up in it, and alcoholism is a progressive disease. And so I never knew to jump out of the pot. That water started to boil, and I just boiled away in that pot. And what I know today is if you throw the frog in the pot of boiling water, he's going to jump out, but I didn't know that. I boiled away for 41 years in the pot of alcoholism, and it is a progressive disease. So we had all this stuff going on. My mom had the idea that if we moved out of Chicago, where all the drunken uncles were, and all the parties and the baptisms and the christenings and April 1st and whatever else came along, that it was all going to be better. So I learned that. I just learned if you moved to a different place or everything, you would have all these hopes and dreams that it was all going to be better. So we finally got together. They were depression kids, and so we finally got together enough. We moved to the suburbs, and it started all over again, and it was confusing to me. I remember thinking, it was supposed to be better once we moved here. It was going to be better. But she got it started all over again, because there were no more drunken uncles and christenings and weddings, but my father became post commander of the VFW, and it was just like one long polka party, and just a lot of drinking, and I just loved it. I learned to dance standing on the shoes of drunk old uncles, and I was very attracted to all of that kind of energy. Even I had no idea that it wasn't good energy. So time went on, we moved to the suburbs, and then eventually my dad lost the job and was invited to have a wonderful position, big qualifications in Utah. So once again, we go through the thing. It's going to be better. We're moving to Utah. We're going to really get away from it all. We're going to get away from the uncles and all of the celebrations and the VFW. And we're going to start there. It's going to be all great. So he took off 3 months before. She plans this big train ride. We're going to pioneer across the United States, the bird and the dog and my sister and brother. And she made it sound like this big, wonderful adventure. And so we get on the train, and my dad met that train drunk, and it started all over again. And again, it was what I know today, the progression of alcoholism. She thought we were going to leave it behind. I was thinking, whatever she thinks, I'm fine with that as long as she quits, picking on me. And it was a horrible year. And I was a senior in high school that year, and I had no friends. I was raised up with American Bandstand. I had a ducktail and a poodle skirt, and all these girls. I'm moving into Mormon community, and they're all dressed like Mormons, and I didn't look like that. And so I was a senior. I don't fit in. I'm dressed weird. And so I skipped a lot of school that year, just walked the streets, and nobody missed me. It's just, you can really disappear in life, and it's pretty simple. Everybody was in my life was either caught up in their own life or the progression of alcoholism, and I just disappeared. So I turned 18, and my dad took me off where he worked, and I don't know if I was there a month or a week. I don't know how long it was. And one day they said, oh, that calculator's broke. We're going to call the guy and have this call in for a service call. So I didn't know anything. I was a file clerk in a blueprint island and a bunch of engineers. And I was just glad to have a job and get out of that mess. And so all of a sudden, he walked in, and he's got a briefcase. He's got a crew cut. He's got a ducktail. He smoked cigarettes, and he blew smoke rings. And there is a certain way that alcoholics smoke. And even though those darn things are killing him today, he quit smoking a long time ago, but I mean, I was just so attracted to those things. It was the combination of the way it sat in the corner of his mouth, and the way he walked, and the way he wore his hair, and the fact that he was much older than I was, and he had a sport coat and a tie, and the building we were in was kind of like way out in the boondocks, so I figured he had to have a car. And in about 30 seconds, my life was planned out. I knew exactly what it was going to look like. Well, come to find out, he was married. But the good news in that was he wasn't married very long, and apparently they were already having trouble. And there were nights when he would sleep in his office on a cot and hang his clothes up on a pipe. And then there was nights when he'd come, or days when he'd come in the office, and the report was they were back together. And then he'd come back in, and he was sleeping on a cot, and his clothes were on the pipe. And I never felt bad when that happened. I just thought, here I am, a kid. I barely turned 18 years old. My grandmother promised me that if I wasn't married by the time I was 19, my ovaries were going to atrophy, and it was going to be all over. So I didn't have much time left. And there's this guy, looks to me 6 months married, older guy, everything that I don't know. I didn't date very much. I was very naive about life, I can tell you that. And I thought to myself, if he was mine, I could make him happy. And that was my whole thing. If he was mine, I could make him happy. Now, I don't know how to make myself happy at that point in life. So he comes into the office one day, kind of brushed up against me, and he says, I'm officially separated from my wife, and I'd like to take you out on a date. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm going to make my grandmother's deadline. So I take him home. I give him my address, tell him he'll have to pick me up at the house. I was being proper. And he walks in, and I introduce him to my mom, and my dad just kind of, it was like the long arm just grabbed my date and swooped him off into the kitchen. And by the time we went off, I know today he was like half in the bag before we ever got behind the wheel of the car and went out for our first date. Anyhow, by the time he finished the evening, he was out of money, and he was what they call knee walking drunk. That's I'm so glad I go to open AA meetings. I learned so many good things, like and he was about knee walking drunk. And so I'm thinking to myself, if he kisses me goodnight, I got it made. And so I was a little obsessed that night. I was just focused in on going back home and getting on that porch and this big kiss, and I was thinking, he's mine. So we get to that point where we finally get home. He kind of gets himself up the sidewalk, and he's standing at the door like this. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, I also learned they have to drive like this. Well, I want you to know that when they're knee walking drunk and they're going to give you their first kiss goodnight, it's like one of these deals. He wasn't sure how many girls he was bringing home that night. Well, he missed, and he got the doorbell, and she came swooping out in the darkness, and that guy sobered up on my porch, and all that I remember is the taillights in a red blur going down 3rd Street. And I think to myself, well, that's the end of him. Well, I didn't know it then, but I know it now. You can't get rid of him. Don't worry about it. You cannot get rid of him. But I worked really hard that year because I didn't have that piece of information back then. So he was in and out, and he was doing everything drunks do. He'd call me up and he'd say, well, go out tonight. I'll pick you up at 7:30. 7:30 would come, and he wasn't there. And at 8 o'clock, he wasn't there. At 8:30, I start taking off the makeup, and I'm crying in my pillow, and I'm thinking, I'm not good enough. What can I do to make it different? And I, at that time in my life, between the active alcoholism and just all of the other, just life in general, I really feel like I had very little going on in the area of self-worth. It was already, down the hooter, really. So I'm wondering if I change my hair to blonde, if I buy a new pair of pedal pushers, if I lose 10 pounds, that would make him want to come home. But I didn't know then at that time that when the man took the drink took a drink, and the drink took the man. And he lost his ability to choose. And it had nothing at all to do with whether he loved me or didn't love me, or we were going to eventually get married or anything. When he went to the keg and he took a drink, that was the end of it. He lost the ability to choose. And I was busy trying to figure out what to change on the outside to make myself more attractive to the progressive disease of alcoholism. And there's nothing I could do, but I didn't know that then. And next day he would call and he'd say, I don't know what happened. And it took me a little while in Al-Anon before I realized that was the right answer. He didn't know what happened. And he would say, I just went to the keg, we're shooting a little shuffleboard, I got a couple of beers, and the next thing Mary and Bill are shutting the door and they're telling us it's time to clear out. And I don't know what happened in between 5 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what happened. But it will never happen again. I promise you, Beverly. Well, it didn't happen once or twice. It happened many times. We dated for a year and a week. Now, if I would have known anything about alcoholism, I would have known. I was in for a long ride, but I would have signed up anyhow, because I just, from the very minute I laid eyes on him, I had fallen head over heels in love with him, and that was going to be it, and I didn't care. And that's all that I knew. That's all that I knew. And so a year and a week later, we got married by a justice of the peace in the home that my mom and dad were living at in the time. And we sat out. We had a little apartment. We went into Salt Lake for an overnight little honeymoon. Got home on Monday. He goes off to work, and he doesn't come home for dinner. And I'm just baffled. I've got a tuna casserole sitting there ready to serve up. And I'm just baffled, because in spite of my dad's alcoholism, I guess he was so afraid of my mom, he showed up at 5 o'clock no matter what. but this guy didn't. He just didn't show up, so I made a phone call. Now this is, we got married on Saturday, this is Monday. I make a phone call to the office, and I said, honey, I've got dinner ready, when are you coming home? And he said, I'll be there in a little while, dear. And I says, okay. So half hour goes by, and I call him again. And I said, hi, honey, when are you coming? Now this stuff is looking like wallpaper paste in the kettle. And I says, honey, when are you coming home? And his voice changed. And he says, I'll be there when I get there. Now, I don't know to stop then. So about a half hour later, now you can't even stir this stuff. And I call him again, and I said, when are you planning to come home? And he says, I told you I'd be there when I get there, and don't call me again. And I don't know what to do with the way that I feel at that moment. I'm like, oh my God. We've been married, 48 hours? And I don't know how to handle this kind of behavior, because my dad always showed up. And I wish I could tell you that only happened once in a while. It happened every single night for the next 21 years. And I took it as personal 21 years later as I did the very first night. Now, I don't take all the rage that I feel about this out into the community. I got to tell you a little secret. I got pregnant on my honeymoon. Now, that would have never happened if I would have taken the birth control pills that I had in my purse, but I didn't know you were supposed to start those immediately. And so I had to end up giving them away to somebody else whose prescription run out and was not pregnant. So I had a baby 9 months and two days after we were married, and 2 years after that I had a second baby. And my husband is never home, and I am filled with rage, and I don't know where to put it except out on these little kids. And yet as I was raising up, with my mom, I was judging her. I was judging her behavior. I was judging the way she treated me. I was judging the way she treated my sister and my dad. And I was making little notes in my little mental notebook thinking, when I get married and I have children, I will never do that. I will never say those things. I will never hit my children. I'll never do this to my children. But the fact is that until I got to you, I didn't know how to do it any different. And I repeated the same behavior that I promised myself I would never do. And I was in a progressive stage of alcoholism as well. And my behavior got far worse than my mother's behavior was, and I was appalled at myself. I would hear myself screaming, and I would think, what is wrong with you? I would see myself enraged at these little babies that were crying in the middle of the night and not know how to control my emotions because I was tired, because I had been arguing in my head all day long. When he calls me tonight and he says he's not going to, then not to call him again, I'm going to say this, and then he's going to say that, and I'm going to let him have it. Now, I know today that the best thing that I can do when I'm in that place is take some of that yellow tape from CSI that says crime scene. Because it's not good news that goes on in there. But fortunately today, most of what goes on in my head is pretty peaceful and pretty kind and pretty loving. And when it's not, I know what to do about it. I have a sponsor. And I know to call her on the phone and then, explain to her what I'm thinking. And then she goes, oh, yeah, you better go to a meeting tonight. So, but I don't have that today. But it was progressing in me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
And it was getting worse. And my little kids are growing up, and they learned how to stay away from home just the way I learned how to stay away from home. But I had an episode where one time I grabbed a wooden spoon and a diapered baby and started to beat on him, and I lost all sense of reality and control. And I heard the voice of God, and I know it today. And God said, if you hit him again, you'll kill him. Because you know what? There's a point of no return when you have white hot rage. And I knew if I didn't put that little guy down, and I literally dropped that baby and dropped the spoon, and I stood back and I thought, what have you become? And I mean, I had many more years of living with active alcoholism. That was just the beginning, and that's where I had come to. And so time went on. My husband went up the corporate ladder, and we went from one position to a bigger position to Texas in 1978. And I didn't know it then, but by the time we got to Texas, not only was my husband's alcoholism progressing, but I had 2 full-blown alcoholic children, and they were 13 and 15 years old when we moved to Texas. And they were drinking and stealing from me and telling me lies, and I had no idea what was going on in the house. The oldest boy was running track and field. He was the head of the wrestling team, and I know there's a name for that, but I can't think of it now, what that is. And they were going to state. We were living in New Jersey, and wrestling was as big in New Jersey as football is in Texas. And he was, he was on the top of the heap, and it was wonderful. We get to Texas. He gets involved with swimming. He was a champion backstroker. He was wrestling. They didn't wrestle much. He was running cross country, track and field, had a job at the local grocery store, bought a truck. He was making payments on it. Now, who would ever think that that was an alcoholic child? Now, the other one was questionable. He had a lot of unusual traits. One of them was stealing my stuff. However, he would never fess up to it, so we played this little game, and I would say, "Where did Dad's golf clubs go?" "Well, I don't know." "You better ask the older one." And I'd go to the older one and I'd say, "Where did Dad's golf clubs go?" And he goes, "I don't know, Mom. I don't think Dad had golf clubs." Now, what I didn't know is they were sawing them off into about 1.5-inch pieces, and they were selling bongs out my front door. I had no idea that that's where the golf clubs were going. But there were other things that were missing, parts of our ceiling fans, steaks out of the freezer, some of my jewelry. I didn't have much, but it would be missing. And I always started with the young one, and I'd say, "Do you know what happened to my ring?" "No, Mom, but you better ask the older one." So I'd go to the older one, and I'd say, "Do you know what happened to my ring? What did it look like, Mom?" "Well, it was gold, and it had a big orange stone in it." And he goes, "I don't ever remember seeing you wear anything like that, Mom." And one day after I'd gone to them a number of times, over probably a year, the older one puts his hands on my shoulders, looks me right in the eye, and he says, "You know, Mom, I'm really worried about you. I think something terrible is wrong with you. I think it might be a good idea if you went to the doctor." He said, "You keep thinking that we have things here that we don't have." Well, he was right. We didn't have them anymore. There were a lot of funny-looking people that come through my house. We kept throwing them out. My husband would come home, throw them out the front door. We absolutely were convinced that it was the people that my children were running around with that were causing the problems. And if they would run around with a better crowd of people, nicer people, that we wouldn't be having these problems. Well, I later found out that most of the problems my kids were in the other homes, and the parents are saying, "If you wouldn't be running around with those Burnett boys, everything would be good around here." So I had my own living. It was going on like that. Now, I don't need to tell you what it's like to have teenage alcoholics. If you've had them, you know what they are. I mean, it is a form of insanity beyond anything that you can describe by words. And then along with that, I've got a progressed alcoholic husband who was hiding behind a huge title. He had over 100 employees. He had 5 supervisors, a number of secretaries. He wore a white shirt and a suit to a tie. And I just thought, how could anything be wrong here? And yet something was terribly wrong. I had stopped entertaining. I stopped inviting people to the house because they'd come in. My husband wouldn't even say, "Let me take your coat." He'd say, "What can I get you to drink?" And I just thought, by the time the evening was over, it was chaotic, and people were fighting, and people were mad. And no matter what would happen, it was always my fault. It was always my fault. So I stopped entertaining. I stopped going out with the ladies at the bank. I stopped all of my life because it just got too difficult, too complicated. I started shopping at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning so that I could be there when they got up, because if I wasn't there, I felt like, they'd fight with each other, and it was just awful. So my life got smaller and smaller, and the alcoholism got bigger and bigger, and I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was going on in our life. So one day I go to work. Margaret's been gone for 3 days. She comes back, and I said, "Margaret, where have you been?" She says, "Well, our son almost died of alcoholism over the weekend," and she said they had him on life support and, in intensive care, but he's better now, and they took him up to this place in Denton called Westgate. And I heard her say they're going to cure him of his alcoholism. So in the lunchroom that day, I said to her, "What did it look like? What was he doing?" And she started to tell me about her son's life and what he was doing. And for just a moment, the denial inside of my head, we are so good at not looking at reality. And just for a split second, I could see the reality of my life, the pills in the washing machine, the burnt tweezers hanging over the gear shift of my son's truck, which he said was to start the gizmo. I didn't know. I didn't know. Doug would know about that, but I didn't know. And, I was making Kool-Aid and cookies for kids while they were coming in to watch the 10 pots of marijuana grow that I thought was mystery seeds. I was planting them, I watered them, I put them in my southern exposed bedroom window, covered them with saran wrap, and just watched them grow on bacon. I make the best peanut butter chocolate chip cookies you will ever taste. And I'm baking up the cookies and making the Kool-Aid, and when the little boys are coming to see the miracle plants growing, I'm taking them in and asking them if they would like some Kool-Aid and cookies. And my boys are saying, Mom, go to your room. And I said, but you guys are in my room. Okay, we're leaving now. We're going to go. Well, I come back after 6 weeks of raising up these plants, and one day they're gone. And I go into a panic because I'm thinking, how am I going to explain this to the science teacher? They told me it was a science project. Brought me that little bag of seeds home in a plastic Ziploc bag and asked me if I would hip. That's how they say help in Texas, hip. And so I decided I'd hip them. And they were gone on this Friday night when I got back from work, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And in a moment of insanity, I was going to run to the school and tell the science teacher that the cats must have got it. I have proof that we actually grew them. They were this big, had huge dark green leaves. They were hybrid marigolds as far as I was concerned. And then one day they're gone, and then I had a moment of clarity. I think, okay, it's 20 after 7 on a Friday night. Chances are the science teacher is not going to be there. So I decided I'd wait till Monday, take the morning off work, and go and explain to the science teacher that we really did the project. Well, in the meantime, I put some laundry away, and the science project was thumbtacked inside my son's closet. Now, while Margaret was talking to me about what her son was doing, I saw this whole episode of the mystery seeds, and the gold ring with the orange stone, and the golf clubs, and the pills, and the pliers, and all of this stuff. And it got so frightening to see that I just slammed the door shut. I couldn't look at it again. And yet, once we have some information, what are you going to do with it? So I said to her, I wonder if maybe we could go there. So I called my husband. I said, I'm going to make an appointment for Westgate, because after that little situation with the thumbtacked mystery seeds, I thought perhaps we had a little problem here. So we go to the treatment center, and we are evaluated by a team of 4 or 5 counselors in the treatment center, and they interviewed us as a family, and they interviewed us one by one, and at the end of the interview they said, well, we're absolutely convinced somebody in this house has alcoholism, but we don't know who. And I was offended, because what they didn't realize is that I had quit drinking on the night, probably less than a month after we were married. We were coming back from his Christmas party, and he was, again, knee-walking drunk, and he was a kind of a guy, I learned here, that didn't surrender his keys. And so I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden he says to me, hold the wheel, I gotta pee. So he opens up the door at 60 miles an hour, and he peed out the door, and I thought, you know what, I can't be drinking, because I never knew. I just never knew when I was going to be needed. And I needed a clear head. So that was my last, maybe from time to time, if we had a pizza, I might have a little bit of beer, but I really went on the wagon after that night, because I thought, I just have to pay attention here. So I was really offended when the lady at the treatment center told me that we could bring him or her back. So that was somewhere around the 20th of January of 1981. And on the 9th day of February of 1981, my son took something I knew I had. And when I approached him, the way I approached him was in my pajamas, chased him down the street, and I was calling my son names that no mother should ever, ever, ever call her child. And my little drug addict little son turned around and looked at me, and he said, Mom, go back in the house, you're an embarrassment. And that's where it took me. I had absolutely no control over my emotions. And on that day, he called me when he got to school, and he says, Mom, if you'll come and get me, I will go to treatment. So he did. When I got there, the treatment center lady said, you'll have to go to Al-Anon, and I explained to her I had a busy life and that I worked. And she said, so do we. And so I went to meetings. Now, I went to meetings not with a pure motive. I certainly didn't know that I was deeply affected by the disease of alcoholism, and that if I went to 6 meetings as close together as possible, you know, that I might begin to understand how alcoholism had affected me. They just said, go until he gets out of treatment or you can't come back here and visit him. Now, I hated my kids by that time. You know, I just hated him. I didn't want much to do with my husband. You know, our personal life was, you know, it was horrible. The kids were just driving me crazy. I'm screaming up and down the neighborhood. I mean, it's just really bad. And so I had no idea why I was there, except I didn't like the kids. She told me I couldn't come and see the kids, and I'm like, you aren't going to tell me what to do. So I went to Al-Anon to spite her. Now, my son went to the treatment center because he and his little buddy had been robbing houses in our neighborhood that weekend, and the little buddy was in the Denton County Jail, and my son knew it was only a matter of moments before the long arm of the law grabbed him out of a classroom and put his little butt into the Denton County Jail next to his buddy. So he called me in his cute little voice that only a mother could love and said, if you'll come and get me, I'll go to treatment. So his motive for treatment was not pure. So I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter. Just stick around long enough, as Doug talked about so beautifully tonight, until you hear the music, until you learn how to speak Alanese, until I have a friend in Reno, and she and her husband spent some time in Ixtapa, Mexico about a month ago. And she was looking forward to going to Ixtapa because there's a little meeting there that has 8 members. And she doesn't understand, you know, she doesn't speak Spanish, but she wrote me an email from Ixtapa, and she says, I couldn't understand what they were saying, but she says, all I knew is that they were speaking Al-Anon. And see, that's what begins to happen here. I couldn't understand a thing you were saying in the beginning. You were laughing at things that I was laying in my bed at night crying about. But what I understood is that you were beginning to speak the language of Al-Anon, and I was beginning to understand at some level that there was a level of truth and honesty in the meetings that I had never. I mean, everybody was covering up, don't tell Auntie Helen this, don't tell them that. My father would say, I'm going to tell you this, but don't tell your sister. And you know how all that stuff goes on. And you can't, it's like you don't know when you're living in an alcoholic family that's just so messed up, the true from the false. And yet I had some sense within a very short period of time of coming to Al-Anon that I was really getting the truth here. And for some reason or other, I mean, I was just like, wow, this is so cool. But I was only going to stay 28 days. Even though I went to a meeting almost every day just to spite her, I really intended to leave on March 8th. And so that's why I think today I'm really a miracle. But my husband and I last January were at a convention in Tyler, Texas, and the alcoholic woman that talked on Saturday afternoon said something that really, it put 28 years together for me. It was like I didn't question it, but I understood. This lady stood up there and she says, one day I'm on Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas, Texas. I'm a prostitute, I'm a drug addict, alcoholic, I don't have a place to live, my hair was falling out, wine sores. I mean, she described a worst case scenario. She said, the next day I was in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been here ever since. And the only thing that I can say is that I was swimming around in the pool of alcoholism, and she said, God blew the whistle and said, you, out of the pool. And that's what happened. Except when God blew the whistle for me, he said, you, out of the pool, and take those 2 crazy kids and that husband with you. But see, what I understood her to say is that was grace. God gives each and every one of us grace. But the real grace is that once God blows the whistle and says, you, out of the pool, the grace came that I went to meeting after meeting after meeting for the next 29 years. That's grace. Because I don't have what it takes to have that kind of a commitment to anything. I've never had this kind of a commitment, and it's not even a drudgery. I mean, I look forward to my service commitments. I look forward to my meeting. I look forward to the days when my girls call me on the phone and we get a chance to chat. I look forward to all that. My name is always on the board in my home group for either chairing a meeting or I have a service position. And my husband and I have a busy life. You know, I'm gone a lot. And the work that we've done for the past 28 years has kept us gone a lot. And yet, this is so important, the commitment and the reality that I have more to lose today than I had to lose the day I walked into the door keeps me coming back and wanting more. Because, see, I still find out that I have defects of character. And do you know how I find out I have defects of character? I take them public. I take my defects of character right into Walmart, and I present them out there every once in a while, and I let you see something about me that surprises me. And you know, then I get to call my sponsor and say, guess what I did in Walmart today? And it never comes as a surprise, but that's why I keep coming back. I keep growing and growing and growing in this, and I think, oh well, I've written in my journal, I've read the ODAT book, I've sponsored all these girls. You know, surely the day is going to come when I'm going to get better. And I used to tell, Gracie was my sponsor for about 9 years, and I would call her and I'd say, you know, Gracie, I don't think I'm ever going to get better. And she'd go, well, let's hope not. She said, because if you get better, we're going to be digging you a 3x6x6. And so it gives me hope. She says it's progress, it's not perfection. So it was just these little tidbits of information that took the load off, you know, that I didn't have to get better all in one. Little Barbara Davis, she went to Al-Anon before there was Al-Anon in Dallas. Her and Barbara, or Nancy, they're still, well, Barbara's passed away, but Nancy is still an active member of the Horizon group where I was born. And you know, they always used to say to me, Beverly, how old are you? I'd say, I'm 41 years old. Okay, it took you 41 years to get sick. It's going to take you 41 years to get better. Well, I'm past halfway there. I mean, I'm 29 years. In a few more years, hopefully, I'm going to be here. I'm going to get better. You know, I don't know. Yeah, really. So time went on, and I really, in the early years, thought that when you come into Alcoholics Anonymous, the boys we had such a wonderful experience. The young one's sober. My husband got sober as a result of a meeting at the treatment center on the 23rd. We're going to meeting on the 30th of March, and I noticed that, well, actually the 29th, Sunday. Going to a meeting, I noticed the older boy is drunk. I say, oh my God, he's drunk. And the young one says, well, Mommy's worse than me. So I go to a meeting and I ask somebody about what we should do with the older kid, and they said you can either ask him to join you in recovery or get him out because he can't live in a sober home. I didn't know that. And so I don't have the courage to confront the alcoholism. I don't want him to run away, so that's another example that they don't. I go home armed with Bill's courage, and I said, you can either join us in recovery or you have to move out because your brother's sober, your dad's sober, and I'm going to Al-Anon every single day and sometimes twice a day. And you can't live here and drink and drug. And so he did exactly what I thought, hopped out of bed, got in his pick-em-up truck, and ran down the driveway at 80 miles an hour. And I thought, well, that's the end of my son. Well, I'm here to tell you, they don't go away. He called from the store, and he says, okay, I'll go to one AA meeting. So I wanted to give him a little lecture about one AA meeting's not enough. And I heard the voice of God again say, shut up. And so he came to AA with us the next night. I'm going to Al-Anon. They're in the back seat. My husband's in the front seat. My husband don't like the way he's dressed. He's got on a Coors hat, a tequila t-shirt, holy jeans, titty shoes, and my husband had gained some respectability, and he was not walking in the front door of Alcoholics Anonymous with a kid that looked like that. So he jumped out of the car on FM 407, Justin. And he says, I'm not going. And I get out of the car, and I am now chasing him down FM 407, and the car is parked in the middle of a 2-lane highway. And the young one rolls down the window, and he says, Mom, get in the car. We're going to be late for the meeting. So now I have, what do you do? I mean, what do you do? So I thought, do I leave him, or do I get in the car? And I thought, well, okay, I'll get in the car. So I got in the car and I drove to the meeting. Millie says, who's that? I said, it's my son. She said, he's half dead. And that's where denial was. So they take him. She said, you go to Al-Anon. We'll take care of him now. He's ours. And so I went to go get a cup of coffee, and as I was going back into the Al-Anon meeting to sit down, I noticed that they were offering desire chips. And I saw my young son nudge the older son, and he got up to the podium, and I saw my older son, who just celebrated 29 years, get his first desire chip. And then I also got to see the miracle of sobriety, how one person works with another. And that man who Millie assigned to him that first night and said, you work with him, and then she said, you go to Al-Anon, we'll take care of him. She's still pointing at me like that today. So anyhow, they start taking care of my son. And the next thing I know, the phone rings at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's Bobby, and he's calling my son and telling him to get out of bed and get on his knees and ask God for a day of sobriety. And I heard my son's first sober prayer. And that night around 10 or 10:30, Bobby calls again. He says, okay, before you go to bed, get on your knees, tell God thank you for this day of sobriety. And what I heard my son say that night was, hi God, Bobby told me to tell you thank you for this day of sobriety. And he would tell God that Bobby told him for a long time. And then one day they went to a young people's convention, and I was sitting in my chair, and it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun sets at my house, that the kitchen sits west. My son came in from that young people's convention, and I watched him walk in the door, and I knew he had had the spiritual awakening. I saw it on him. And it was at those times, that I thought, this really works. And I'm plugging along now. The young one didn't stay sober, so all of a sudden the pink cloud seems to disappear. And I got a kid that's not sober. But what that did is every time, the big book says that pain is the touchstone to all spiritual growth. I don't know what page that's on. And our serenity prayer says that hardship is the pathway to peace. And I am here to tell you that every single thing that I've walked through in the last 29 years that has been really painful has led me to a closer relationship with my God. And so I watched this child. He's not going to stay sober. We ship him off to Minnesota. He stays 45 days, comes home, stays sober a little bit of time, and he's drunk again and using drugs. And I had the courage to ask him at age 17 to leave the house. And he never lived with us again. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to do, because I had to learn how to turn this child over to God, just the way you told me. Put him up there, say, God, he's yours. God has no grandchildren. And I learned to do that with all sincerity, because I knew there wasn't one thing that I could do to protect that child from his alcoholism, because there was a sign on the podium in my Al-Anon group that says I couldn't cause it, I couldn't control it, and I sure couldn't cure it. And somehow or other, early on, I knew that. So he went out there and he lived the way kids in progressed alcoholism live. And as he was going down, the other kid was just soaring into sobriety. I watched his sponsor help him through a fourth step. He went to college. He ended up a couple of years later, 4 years later, walked across the stage of Texas A&M University with a degree. And my husband and I are sitting in the audience, and I'd heard stories in Alcoholics Anonymous that says, how did we get from there to the back seat of that car with the Coors hat, the tequila t-shirt, the holy jeans, titty shoes, to a young man who was respectably sober, active in his own recovery, walking across the stage of Texas A&M in a cap and gown with a degree. It was like, wow, this is what they're talking about. And every time I saw these evidences of God, I needed big evidences at first, but in the beginning, now it's like I am so aware of every little thing that God does for me. I know that as much as I am aware of God in my life and the grace that is given to me on every single day, how all my needs are met, I know I still overlook, but back then, I was looking for these big things, and God never let me down. He wanted me here so bad. He kept showing me the way and showing me the way and showing me the way. And at any day, I could have made the decision to say, I've had enough. There's my kid. I'm working a program. His father's sober, his brother's sober, and this isn't working because he's not. But you see, I was given a big book. I was told to go to a lot of meetings. I followed directions. I had a sponsor who said to me one day, I only want you to read conference-approved literature. Well, what she really was saying, don't get involved in any of those self-help books. But she didn't go that far to explain it. I am naive, I take you at your word. So I don't read anything but conference-approved literature. Some years later, we are at an event, and she said something, and I said, well, Sally, you told me to only read conference-approved literature, and I saw her eyes glaze over. Because I think they were talking about the latest hit novel or something, and I said to her, well, you know, Sally, you told me only to read conference-approved literature. And she said, and I said, well, that's all I've been reading. So as a result of that, I know all of the conference-approved literature inside and out, because I didn't read a McCall's magazine or a novel for about 5 years. So time went on, and you know, and life happens. And this young kid found a wife, got married. A couple of years later, they decided to get pregnant. I didn't think it was a good idea because they were in active alcoholism and it was very progressed by this time. But I learned how to let go and let God. I learned how to detach with love. I learned how not to enable. Now, it really made the little young bride upset. She liked enabling. She liked checks in the mail. And I'd learned you could kill him. Your kindness could kill your son, and I knew you were right. So they decided to get pregnant. There wasn't much I could do about that, and they had a baby on May 12th of 1988. 6 months later, my son got sick. He was put in intensive care, and 10 days after that, he was diagnosed in full-blown AIDS. And they said he had less than a year to live. Now, that was the time I took my dad, so all this was coming down. The dog also, I had a golden retriever then, and they were telling me that the next time her hips went out, I was going to have to put her down, which was going to be really soon. I called a sponsor and I said, you know what you said, this program said, every piece of literature says, God will never give you more than you can handle. I said, my dad is dying, my son is diagnosed with AIDS, and I have to put my dog to sleep. I said, that's a lot. And I said, there is no God. She says, Beverly, this is no time to get angry at God. She says, this is the time where you have to come to believe that this power is going to get you through and give you everything you need every single day. And I keep a journal. I've written ever since I got in the program. And she's at the top of that page, I want you to write the evidence of God. And I says, I don't think you get this. My dad is dying, my son is dying, and I'm going to put my dog to sleep, and you want me to look for the evidence of God. And she said, you know what, honey, if you don't do that, you're not going to get through this. And I started that night filled with spite, and I'm going to show you to write down the evidence of God. And what I came to understand is throughout all of that, God was there every single minute. Whether it was a nurse that came in and says, we just brewed a new pot of coffee, or a card in the mail from one of you that says, we're thinking about you, hope your dad's doing okay. No matter what it was, I saw the evidence of God every single day. My dad died in February of 90. My son and my husband, he took care of getting him to all of his hospital and doctor. I took care of the little baby. My daughter-in-law went to work, and we worked as a family. Sometimes it wasn't pretty. Sometimes there is nothing written that tells you how to watch your child die. There's nothing out there. So every single one of us that have to go through this, we blaze our own trail, and we do it the best we can, a day at a time. And my son managed to live for 5 years, and I watched the disease take him a day at a time. But every day I was writing the evidence of God. And he passed away in February of 93, and for the next 5 years, my husband and I went through hell. We beat that marriage to a bloody pulp behind the grief that we felt in that loss. And one day we had to come to a decision about whether we were going to stay or go. It was just too painful to stay, and it was going to be even more painful to go. It would be another death, and we didn't know how to face that. And we came to the conclusion with this we got another golden retriever puppy by that time, and we decided that Logan needed the backyard. And so we stayed. And with the help of sponsors and traditions, and a backyard and a puppy and a little girl, by now she lost her daddy when she was 4 years old. When the people from Alcoholics Anonymous came to the service, they said, she said to them, thanks for coming to my daddy's party. And I thought that was kind of an odd thing for a little girl to say, but the bottom line is that my son's life was a celebration because I was an active member of Al-Anon, and his brother and his dad were sober. And the young man that did part of one of the little talks at the memorial service was the kid that we threw out a number of times because he wasn't good enough for our son, and he was 5 or 7 years sober at that time. And, you know, it was a celebration. My son and my husband did a 12-step call, and my sister's husband and my brother-in-law has 28 years of sobriety. You know, and so all of these things came to pass. And all that I've ever done is just keep coming back, just keep coming back. And life has been good, and life has been not so good. My husband and I have worked together. That is a challenge. 28 years we have worked together. And we actually finally learned how about 10 years ago and found out that what we did was a lot of fun. And so, you know, we've started to, we really enjoy what we're doing, and now we're, you know, have to retire a little bit, not completely, but we're still having fun doing what we do. And we've got these 2 dogs, and we've lived in the same house for 32 years, in the same neighborhood. The little 4-year-old is now almost 22. She absolutely knows without a shadow of a doubt because we exposed her to 13 or 15 years of the Crested Butte Mountain Conference in Colorado, and all of you took care of her. She knows what alcoholism is. When she was 5, she had a shot for some pre-surgery, and she came out of the room singing Yankee Doodle Dandy, and the nurse said to us, "We have never seen anybody react to that drug like that." And we says, "Oh, we have." Yes, we definitely have seen people do this. And then a couple of years ago, she had all 4 wisdom teeth pulled at the same time. She was 18 at the time. And they gave her some big high-powered pain pills, and she turned into some kind of a snake that none of us recognized. And she called me on the phone, and she goes, "You know, Nanny, I think I probably have alcoholism." And I says, "Well, only you can make that decision." And to this day, she's almost 22. She'll be 22 on May 12th. She has not had a drink of alcohol, because she knows that she runs the great risk and possibility of being an alcoholic. And I think, you know, that in itself is amazing. We've got 2 little granddaughters that live here in Laguna. A couple of years ago, 18 months ago, they came to stay with us. Last little story, they came to stay with us for 3 weeks. My son was concerned about the older one's health. She was 12. The other one, the little one, was 10. And he says, "Mom, there's something really bad wrong with her." My daughter-in-law says, "You know what, I think he's overreacting, but if you think she needs to be looked at, do it." So my husband and I took one look at that little girl when she got off the airplane, and I was hyperventilating, and my husband said, "Oh, dear God." And we took her, and I took her to the doctor the next day. The doctor examined her very briefly because they could tell by looking at her what was wrong. And they said, "She is a very sick little girl. You go to Children's Hospital, you sit in the waiting room of the emergency, and don't leave until she's admitted." They made us sit there 14 hours because she was a very critical case, and we had social workers and doctors and psychiatrists, and then more social workers and more doctors and more psychiatrists. And, you know, how did you get her? How long have you had her? How long has this been going on? Well, I'm only her grandmother. She got off the plane last night, 2 nights ago. Anyhow, 14 hours later, they admitted her, and she was dying of anorexia, 12 years old. And it's part of the illness. It's somehow or other, she doesn't feel good about herself, and it's the way that disease manifests herself. So I was asked to come back and be with the kids in February. We were left alone for 5 days without any adult supervision. And we had a great time. She's looking good, but what you and I know is that she's been affected by the disease of alcoholism, even though her father is sober 29 years. And the beat goes on in our family. And I take that real serious. And while I laugh, oh my gosh, that's why I love listening to Doug, and I like to laugh. I found my laugh in Al-Anon. I didn't know how to laugh when I got here. You guys helped me find my laugh, and I love it today. But I also know how to cry. And I can cry at the appropriate moments and laugh at the appropriate moments, because before I got here, sometimes that was all mixed up. I didn't know when to laugh, and I didn't know when to cry. And you have put me back together. You have made me a woman that I never, ever dreamed I could be. you know, a woman who is respected in my Al-Anon community, a grandmother who is loved by her grandchildren, a marriage that has held together through thick and thin for nearly 49 years, and 2 golden retrievers who think I absolutely hung the moon. What more could anybody ask for? So thank you so much for staying up late. Do you know what time it is in Texas? It's been really past my bedtime. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.